Chechnya is a mountainous region in the middle of Caucasus that is currently home to more than 1 million Chechens. The small republic has been a part of the Russian Federation for more than 200 years. Despite being annexed, Chechnya repeatedly challenged its sovereign status. The culmination of these protests was reached after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, when the modest republic declared independence. The first great conflict dates back to as early as 1774, when Imperial Russia annexed Ossetia and fortified the Darial Gorge to protect its ally Georgia against the Ottoman Empire. The fear of Russian expansion led to raids on its convoys and resulted in the First Caucasus War in 1817. This was not settled until 1864, after the Russians defeated Imam Shamal's army and destroyed the lands of the remaining tribes in a scorched earth campaign. In the turmoil of the Russian Revolution, the tribes of North Caucasus formed yet another independent republic that lasted until 1921, when it was defeated by the Red Army. With the instigation of Operation Barbarossa, it was suspected that the Chechens would ally with the Germans. In 1944, over 500,000 Chechens and Ingushetians were deported to gulags in Central Asia, together with thousands of other minorities. Only in 1953, after Stalin's death, did Nikita Khrushchev repatriate the deportees. The Chechens always maintained a strong, independent identity. Under the USSR, they were the second most repressed people after the Volga Germans. The Chechens who were repatriated first found their former homes either dilapidated or occupied by other ethnicities. Constant ethnic clashes resulted in permanent discrimination of the returnees by the local government. Ostracization and poverty were the outcomes. The deportation left a permanent scar on the Chechens' identity. Given the circumstances, it was only a question of time until a new war was to erupt in the Caucasus. In the slipstream of the secessions, the newly elected president of the Chechen Republic declared independence after a nationwide referendum, which was suspected to be counterfeit. Chechnya's goal of independence was based on Soviet Act No. 1457, signed by Gorbachev in 1990, which changed autonomous republics like Chechnya into Soviet republics. However, neither the act nor the Declaration of Independence was accepted by Russia. Both Russia and the Chechen pro-Russian opposition exhausted all their approaches and even staged a coup d'etat that failed miserably. Russia had to endure heavy losses over the fall of its former empire. Socialist policies had run down every institution in the country. Consequently, the ex-Soviet Republic had no interest in a further decline. If Chechnya had successfully seceded, who would be next? Would the Federation be divided by a Muslim corridor? After the declaration of sovereignty, the remaining Soviet troops left the Republic peacefully, but left behind armored cars, artillery, and somewhere from 20,000 to 50,000 firearms. The Chechens were heavily armed, highly motivated, and well-trained. Most of them had served in the Soviet army and spoke Russian. Some had even participated in the 1979 Afghanistan War, so they were familiar with the tactics and weapon systems they were now up against. The Chechens deployed highly mobile 20-man units to counter the sluggish Russian army. Until the invasion, they numbered 10,000 men. On the opposing side was the incredibly run-down Russian army. Despite being heavily equipped, hundreds of tanks lacked any means of communication. Strategic planning and information sharing were disastrous. Training and morale were at their lowest. Instead of professional soldiers, inexperienced conscripts were deployed. The first invading force numbered just 20,000 men. Catastrophe loomed. On the night of the 1st of December 1994, the Russian Air Force carried out a heavy aerial bombardment that was followed by a ground invasion on the 11th of December in 3 columns, with Grozny as their final destination. The western column was halted by Ingusetian civilians. 30 cars were set ablaze and 70 conscripts deserted. The northern column's advance was halted by unexpected Chechen resistance. The eastern column had to relocate to the north. Despite the setbacks, the columns were advancing. On the 29th of December 1994, the Russians seized the airfield next to Grozny and repelled a counterattack, with the next objective being the city itself. At 5 a.m. Moscow time, citizens of Grozny were awoken by heavy artillery shelling from the hills. 4 columns had been deployed by the Russians. The objective was to meet at the presidential palace by the end of the day. Countless incidents were reported. Ambushes were placed all over the city, causing many casualties on the Russian side. The Russians were so disturbed and confused due to the lack of communication that there were several incidents of friendly fire. On multiple occasions, battalions from the same side were fighting each other for hours. At sunset, the invading forces were in shambles. Entire battalions had been wiped out. Some 400 tanks and APCs were lost. Meanwhile, the mobile Chechen units were attacking at will and even dared to raid Russian artillery outside the city. In the following days, the Chechens drove much of the remnant of the army out of the city. Russian forces gathered once again outside the city limits. This time, special forces spearheaded the raid on the city and ordered the city to be shelled block by block. After 2 weeks, they finally captured the presidential palace following fierce combat, but failed to capture the enemy leaders. The northern part of the city was finally under Russian control. The artillery now focused on the southern area, which was bombed with 60,000 shells in 2 days. The new offensive was too much for the resistance, and they withdrew. Grozny was taken by 6th of March 1995, after more than 3 months of combat. 30,000 civilian casualties were reported, along with 1,500 Russians and an unknown number of Chechen fighters. The continuing Russian advance deep into the south of Chechnya slowly but surely caused the loss of secluded retreat areas. While IEDs and raids could only slow the advance, other, more extreme measures were executed. To stop the advance, a group of Chechens entered Bujanovsk in the neighboring Stavropol Krai. There, they raided the city hall and police station before taking more than 1,500 hostages at the hospital. After multiple attempts to enter the building failed, the Russian government accepted Chechen demands and halted the offensive in the Chechen mountains, guaranteeing safe passage back to Chechen territory. At least 140 people were killed and 415 injured. Tragic as this was, it was taken as an inspiration for other daring terror strikes. Notably, the operation leader, Shamil Basayev, had worked together with the GRU in prior conflicts in Abkhazia and Georgia. Basayev would later collaborate with foreign Wahhabi Islamists and start the Second Chechen War. On the 6th of August 1996, 1,500 Chechen forces infiltrated Grozny. In a coordinated raid, they split the remaining forces into small pockets of resistance. 7,000 Russians were now trapped. The fortunes of war were clearly on the side of the Chechens as the day before. A large supply of rocket launchers had been delivered to the railway station. Armored columns that tried to break through the lines were nothing more than target practice for the Chechens. On the 19th of August, the Russian commander gave the Chechens an ultimatum to either withdraw within 48 hours or face all-out aerial bombardment. This announcement was followed by chaotic scenes of panic, as civilians tried to flee before the army carried out its threat. The only voice of reason was the Secretary of the Russian Security Council, General Alexander Lebed. He ordered a ceasefire and reopened direct talks with the Chechens. In an agreement, later known as the Caesarius Accord, Russia agreed to a withdrawal which ended the First Chechen War. Out of 100,000 Russian soldiers, 5,800 were killed or missing, and 18,000 were wounded. Of the approximately 18,000 Chechens involved, 4,000 were killed. Up to 80,000 civilians also lost their lives. Countless atrocities were reported from both sides, which turned Chechnya into a tragic zenith of human immorality. Countless lives were sacrificed for their de facto independence. But as the enemy on the outside seemed to be defeated, internal strife would divide the young nation and bring it to the brink of civil war.